guys. Welcome to our panel on VC talent in the Silicon Valley. We're really seeing a lot happening there, so we're going to have an interesting discussion today. My name is Illovsky. I am the Director of Talent at Accel Partners in Palo Alto. We're a global fund. We've got office in London, office in India. We make investments from the seed stage all the way to the growth stage internationally. We've got a wonderful mixed panel for you today. We have a couple of folks from venture and a couple of folks from executive search consulting. So we're going to run down the line and have them introduce themselves first.
Hi, I'm Bethany George, and I'm with Caldwell Partners, where I'm part of the CEO and board practice, and I do a lot of work in private equity and venture capital. And I think what we wanted to share is, how our roles differ. And so, for me, focuses on helping companies build out their executive teams. And within the education sector, I've done work, C-level work and board work for companies like Varsity Tutors, Academic Partnerships, American College Online, and a few others. So.
Hi everyone, my name is Marian and I work at Lightspeed Venture Partners, which is a venture capital firm headquartered in Silicon Valley. Like Accel, we are also global, so we have funds in Israel, China, and India. We've invested to date just over 350 companies around the world. We have just over $4.5 billion under management. Last week, we just announced that we closed our largest fund to date, so a $1.8 billion fund. We invest very early on, as well as early growth, so we have two different funds in the US. And in 2016 and 2017, our portfolio companies were two of the largest IPOs for both those years. And my role is Vice President of Executive Talent, and I work very closely with our founders, as well as our other C-suite executives to help them build out their senior management teams.
I'm Ryan Bulkoski. I'm a partner with Heidrick & Struggles, a global publicly traded executive search firm with about 40 offices around the world. I lead our artificial intelligence practice, and the difference between our roles, as Marian just discussed, I tend to work purely on executive level leadership searches, so I'll do maybe 15 to 20 searches a year, and those span all industries, everything from the education nonprofit sector through financial services, through technology, consumer retail, as we look for executive talent in data science, advanced analytics, and artificial intelligence.
And I'm Cassie Nielsen. I'm with VMG Partners, which is a growth equity fund focused on branded consumer products. So everything within food, beverage, beer, personal care, beauty, pet, brands such as Kind Snacks, Justin's Peanut Butter, Pirate's Booty, Pretzel Crisp, three that are local here. So if you're in San Diego, grab a Stone Beer. That's one of our portfolio companies. Perfect Bar, Sunbum. And in my role, our portfolio is relatively small. So in comparison, we have 17 portfolio companies, which means my role will be not just building out the leadership team, but I get to build out the entire team as that company grows. And hopefully long-term, those folks are really incentivized and excited to continue working with VMG Partners and eventually be the leadership teams of our future investments.
So given that you all work in the talent recruiting space, what technology do you think is going to change your roles the most? So guys, the way we're going to do this is we're going to have them just write their answer on the whiteboard and flip it around really quick, because way easy, then you can kind of see across, and then we'll run through and have them kind of talk about it. You guys ready? Flip. So let's start with Ryan.
So
Since you rebelled.
So this is a really interesting question, because you're talking about how it affects my role, and when we talk about recruiting in mass, let's say a major tech company needs to hire 300 engineers in a year, it's much more transactional. And compared to executive search, you are in a much more highly consultative role. So when I think about the opportunities for automation in recruiting, it applies more to lower level search work. When I consider the technology that has changed my role the most, it more relates to daily tasks. So for example, using Evernote as I'm interviewing someone, using Box for file sharing, building our own proprietary client portal for access to information. So in terms of disruption to the executive search space, I really don't see any particular technology on the horizon that's going to drastically change my role.
Marian?
So I wrote down AI and automation. I would preface this by saying that, similar to what Ryan said, you know, at the executive level recruiting, which is where I spend most of my time, I agree. I haven't yet come across any HR or recruiting technology platform that is changing the way I do my job, just because of how strategic and advisory oriented it is. But obviously, as our companies grow, because we invest very early on, we aim to be the first institutional investor in our companies. So for example, we invested in Snap when there were only 2 employees, and now there are thousands. You know, when you look at the lower level employees and the sheer amount of employees that need to be recruited in, especially the individual contributor roles like engineers and product managers and sales representatives, I think it is this stage of recruiting and level of recruiting where HR technology platforms that are leveraging the use and the power of AI and automation and cognitive solutions are drastically changing the recruiting and the talent acquisition landscape. You know, the recruiting staffing industry in the US alone is $400 billion, and currently on the market there are over 500 HR recruiting technology platforms, and I think through these recruiting platforms, and many of our portfolio companies are leveraging these technology solutions, they're able to identify candidates a lot quicker that are more suitable for the roles that are open, and therefore it's saving our companies, as well as us, a lot of time and a lot of money. So an example would be, we have one early stage company that we recently invested in. It's called Bulkoski. I'm sure none of you have heard of it yet, but one day you will. And they're building a recruiting technology platform that leverages the power of artificial intelligence and automation. And they're working with both small and large enterprise companies. So one of their clients, for example, is Airbnb. And Airbnb have lots of different roles open, for example, for engineers. And you know, depending on the practice areas that they're working in, these engineers need to be strong maybe in Python in one area, R in the other, C++ in other areas of Airbnb with the projects that they're working on. So through the platform that Bulkoski is creating, they're able to very quickly identify candidates that are engineers that have coding experience in those particular languages and send them to Airbnb immediately, and it's shortening the recruiting time frame drastically.
Bethany?
Well, I agree with Marian. AI will have a huge impact on recruiting. In my case, I think that a couple of the things that are starting to come to play is, you know, uses of chat bots and things like that. You know, a lot of what at least Ryan and I do is, you know, engaging passive candidates, you know, at the very senior level. And, you know, right now there's a lot of exchanges over text and email, and we'll get to a point where you don't know if it's a person on the other end. So that's one thing that strikes me. And the other is we see more and more of our clients embedding in their process some sort of online assessment coupled with an industrial psychologist as part of the process. And as computers get smarter, you know, that will take, you know, some of the judgment and the wisdom that we currently as people provide.
Now, Cassie, you have LinkedIn 2.0 written on your board.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
So I don't disagree with what you guys are saying, but in my world, I'm finding people that can run a plant to manufacture bars, or, you know, a really great social media person. So I actually think in our industry, we might be late movers to adopting some of these technologies, or they might not serve my industry as much. However, when I think about the technology that we touch the most in a workforce, in my portfolio, and probably similar for you guys as well, it's LinkedIn. And this may not be a popular perspective, but I think there's a lot of room for improvement for LinkedIn. Hope no one here works there in the room. But you know, as an example, it should be the place where people go to find others, be inspired, challenge each other. It should be the Google group where you can build a community. It should be the first place that employees go to review their companies and find compensation data. It should be the first place candidates go to find their new job, and the first place companies go to advertise roles. And it does all of that right now, but in my perspective, really poorly. So I think there's a lot of room for the tool that we touched the most. I don't know if LinkedIn's going to be the one that innovates quickly. It's a hard, you know, they kind of a monopoly on this industry a little bit. I don't know if Facebook, you know, at work is going to be the solution one day, but I think that's the biggest room for improvement.
Well, I know back in 2011 when I was at Spencer Stewart, and I know Ryan went through this as well, is the conversation with the partners was constantly, oh, LinkedIn's going to put us out of a job. And, you know, 7 years later, we're still not out of a job. And in fact, I think LinkedIn has a lot to improve on, but it does really empower us to do our jobs better. So as we consider kind of disruptive technologies in recruiting, what are some of your associated concerns? Besides just putting people out of jobs, potentially. Cassie, I'm starting with you.
Okay. So what I'm writing here is candidate communication. And what I find the hardest part of my job, and regardless if you automate it, if you don't, if it's high touch, if it's low touch, the rate at which our companies are growing is so fast, and we're also very lean, that I find myself regularly telling candidates, if you haven't received an update from me, touch base. And the reason is, it's, you know, I authentically want to give them updates. I don't want them to know where they are in the process. That's important to me that I'm transparent, but the reality is that might not be my priority. And I work with amazing search firms, and I've been on that side of the house too, and the reality is it may not be their priority either. So I would love a solution for me to communicate with candidates more easily. You know, I can mass text people. Text is like the best vehicle for communication nowadays, and there's really no easy way to do it. And so I would love for there to be a tool, for there to be a method to improve that communication flow.
Now, Marian, I know when you flip your board around, you're also going to be talking about candidate experience.
Yes, so I wrote down my one concern that I have with maybe some of these new HR technology solutions is that we will forget or ignore the candidate experience. Well, I say that I'm kind of torn, because in one sense, you know, I feel that through automating the recruiting process, of course we're not putting the candidate's experience at the forefront because it's being automated. And also, you know, while I feel like automated systems will be able to, maybe better than we can, identify quickly a candidate's professional experience and their skills and make sure that they're more adaptly suited to the roles at hand, I feel like an automated system it's not possible to assess cultural fit or someone's passion for a particular job. On the other hand, I've definitely been counter-argued in that, you know, maybe on the flip side, you know, because it is so automated and individuals or candidates are being approached with opportunities that really strengthen their or are more in line with their professional experiences and skills, they're going to have a more heightened or targeted experience because they're being approached with opportunities that they're going to be very excited about.
Awesome. Now, Ryan, you, I think, also have something about candidates. As you guys can see, we're always very concerned with the candidates. This is like totally a recruiter thing. Like the candidate is like at the center of everything we do. So, Ryan, I'll let you expand on that.
Yeah, so you know, I think that you can quickly lose a candidate's identity if you're relying purely on a natural language processing algorithm to match a person with a job, because it's going to come down to keyword matching. And what you end up losing, you know, maybe that favors someone who's a better writer than someone else. You miss out on the key components of what you would get through an interview with someone that maybe doesn't show up on a resume. And maybe that's somebody's hobbies, their personal interests, a story of struggle growing up. that could be a really great fit for your culture, but if you screened people out based purely on what shows up in a keyword search on a resume, you're probably missing out on an excellent subset of potential individuals who you could hire within your organization. So I think there's opportunity to combine technology with intuition, but you can't rely solely on an automated recruiting process.
Definitely. Bethany?
I agree with Ryan. I think it's the narrow focus on, with all of the automation, you lose sight of like culture building, team building. Can you as a leader recruit and hire talent, which is a big part of building a company for success. So,
For sure. So now, broadening the question, what technologies have the potential to impact the working population the most? Yeah, Ryan, start us off. Tell us more.
So yeah, I was reading this really interesting, kind of futuristic point of view where we're talking about mind reading here. So MIT recently made some research very public on a new wearable device that they call Alter Ego, and it's basically something that you kind of put on your head. It's headset oriented. It doesn't look great yet. I think it will over time, but basically it allows a human to communicate with the machine without vocalizing words. So simply by determining the neuromuscular signals in your mind, it's able to pick up the entire conversation with, right now, this is version 1, 92% accuracy. So then you
Not
say,
creepy
well,
at all.
it's incredible, right? I mean, it's a little scary. But then you say, well, how does that actually change the job market? So, from my perspective, I think this is probably a ways off, but it would drastically really speed up jobs that are heavy in original content creation. I think that there's roles that require dictation, writing, synthesizing would certainly be sped up. I think it also adds in a really nice component from a diverse standpoint. So individuals who may have been hampered from birth, not being able to speak, or went through a terrible accident at some point, would now be able to enter the workforce in more exciting capacities. And so, I think this time in the future when man and machine are inseparable, it may be a little closer than we realize with some of these emerging technologies.
Marian, I want to hear what you have to say about collaboration software.
Yes, so I wrote down collaboration software, and I'm going to take less of a futuristic approach and talk about technology that I think is currently being used that is changing the workforce, and obviously I think it's collaboration software. And the reason why I say that is because if you think even 5 to 10 years ago, it was very difficult for companies to have employees in diverse locations, whether it was around the US or around the world. And I really think through advancements in collaboration software, it's really allowed, at least for a lot of our portfolio companies, and I'm sure it's the same for many other venture capital firms here, a lot of our portfolio companies can have employees in diverse locations now. And the reason for that is because collaboration software has allowed employees to collaborate in real time, to share knowledge in real time. I think it's heightened productivity incredibly. And for me, a couple of examples of collaboration software would be, like communication tools. I don't know if anyone here uses Slack or HipChat, but Slack, unfortunately, it isn't one of our companies. It's a very fast-growing company, founded in 2014, one of the most used business applications out there. And it's incredibly productive for employees because they can have all of their communication in one spot. And then there's, workflow or content management tools like Confluence. Again, it allows teams, whether they're in the same team or cross-functionally, to collaborate in real time. Or there's even, transactional software. For example, like DocuSign. I don't know if anyone's used DocuSign before, but I think through all of these different iterations of collaboration software, it's very easy now for companies to have employees in dispersed locations, which I think is really healthy for a company.
Cassie?
Going to me.
Oh, yeah.
No, I mean, my answer hasn't really changed much. Selfishly, I want LinkedIn to be better for my sake.
You really have it out for LinkedIn.
I know. I'm wondering what's going to happen after this if it gets back to them. No, but also for like employees, for the workforce in general. I think improving this platform. I mean, I would venture to guess that for most people, it's essentially a directory. And otherwise, you get off of that platform as soon as possible. And I think that's a hugely missed opportunity to get so much traffic to one place and not actually like capitalizing on it. So it's just, for me, it's the place that, you know, touches the most employees. It's universal, and there's a big gap in terms of what it could be.
Totally. All right.
And mine didn't change either. It's AI or machine learning. And I think, you know, the perspective that I have on that, you know, Ryan's was kind of, as you said, a little creepy, right? I mean, it's a
Just
big
like
idea.
imagine all the other
but
applications.
I think about, I completely agree that any job that has somewhat of a creative aspect to it, whether it's an artist, a writer, you know, healthcare where you're diagnosing or, you know, dealing with people, those jobs I think are going to continue to be high in demand as computers catch up. But if you were listening to Dr. McAfee talk at lunch, I mean, computers are catching up, right? So people have to be prepared and taught how to be lifelong learners, how to find ways to create value. And that all starts with how they're educated and how the government, the policy, the academic institutions, parents, you know, the private sector all need to work together to really prepare the workforce for the changes that are going to come.
So switching gears slightly, you all work with talent coming out of the Silicon Valley. Is Silicon Valley talent really worth the hype?
You were ready.
What'd you write?
What'd you put?
Oh. Ryan sometimes goes rogue here. So.
Thanks, Kinder. I wish I was funny.
How many? All right, we've got a lot of no's here. So Bethany, I'm going to start with you with just this flat out no.
Well, I often, Silicon Valley DNA is something that I hear from so many clients across the whole spectrum, from early stage companies looking to hire, whether they're in Austin or Boston. We want to bring some Silicon Valley DNA in, as well as the big, public companies. So I find, this is my personal opinion, I find that the Silicon Valley can be very insular in their thinking. And a lot of times what's missing in the conversation is really taking a step back with some of the things that are being created and developed. There isn't an appreciation for people even just living 45 minutes outside of the Bay Area and what they can afford, what can they need. So I think there's just an arrogance that I find. And I'm from LA.
You live in LA.
Right? So that's what I see.
Cassie, you're also a nah.
It's funny because, the title of our talk, I feel like we should be a little bit more endorsing. But look, like our portfolio companies are making products you consume. Whether you eat it, you put it on your face. So we are not software, but at the same time, we're very digitally savvy. So this is very relevant to our world. But I have to say that, thanks to Silicon Valley, a lot of the tools that they've created have essentially commoditized what we do. Everything from e-commerce to social media and all the tools that make us smarter are now a commodity. And so, yes, we have some portfolio companies in the Bay. There are enormous benefits when I help build out those teams in being in that geography. There's also challenges with the cost of living, the cost of compensation. And you know what, and I think our companies that are in a lot of other markets like New York and Chicago and Austin and Boulder are not at a loss because they're not in the Bay. Essentially, we've had a lot of success importing talent from the Bay if we really have to.
Marian, let's go with your depends, and we'll end on this question with
Save it.
Ryan's fangs.
Okay, so I wrote, it depends, and I'm going to answer this question from the perspective of an investor or a founder. So the reason why I think it depends on whether Silicon Valley talent is worth a hype. I don't think it's as simple as you guys are making it. I think it depends on a multitude of factors, but I think three important ones are First, what type of company is even being built? Is it an enterprise company or is it a consumer company? Number two, let's talk about stage. Is it a very early stage company that really needs to build out its infrastructure, or is it more high growth? And three, which I think is probably one of the most important, is where are your customers based? So look, if it's an early stage enterprise company that really needs strong talent in infrastructure, security, DevOps, then I think Silicon Valley talent is worth the hype. There are a lot of amazing engineers and product managers sitting in the Bay Area that have first time and a lot of experience working with very complex enterprise solutions. And also I think it's really important when you're thinking about, as an investor or a founder, wanting to go from initial capital, whether it's seed or Series A, growth to some sort of liquidity event, whether it's an acquisition or an IPO, that you have employees that have seen the full life cycle. And I don't think anyone here can disagree that the most amount of talent in the US that have seen that life cycle is sitting in Silicon Valley. In saying that, it comes at a cost. Compensation is crazy high for employees in Silicon Valley. And also, I don't think there's necessarily a lot of loyalty. So last year, Lightspeed did a survey featuring 300 VC-backed companies. And the results of the survey were that the average tenure of employees in San Francisco is only 18 months. So it's pretty short. And then I think from a consumer company perspective, no, I don't think Silicon Valley talent is necessarily worth the hype. When we look at the breakdown of our high growth consumer companies and that of our enterprise companies, consumer companies can be built with far less resources, especially technical talent, than our enterprise companies. And also getting back to the customer, we are all the consumers of consumer companies, and we're based everywhere in the US and across the globe. So whether it's Spotify, which just went public earlier this month, which is headquartered in Sweden, to Chewy, which is headquartered in Florida, or Jet.com, which had this amazing acquisition by Walmart, or Snap, which went public last year, all of those amazing high-growth consumer companies were not based in San Francisco.
Ryan.
So I will talk about this from the perspective of companies that are not based in Silicon Valley. I can't tell you how many clients will say, we really want to meet candidates from the FANG companies. So Facebook, Amazon, or Apple, Netflix, Google, we need to meet somebody from that company. Why? What's on the wish list? Well, number one, hopefully they'll make a huge impact and bring an entrepreneurial way of thinking to the organization. Two, we can make a huge press release and everyone will be impressed. And three, hopefully this person will bring a bunch of friends with them and we'll have this phenomenal Silicon Valley team who's all moving to New York or Pittsburgh or wherever we're based. But I think there are a couple of risk factors to think about before you decide to actually hire one of those people. I think one is your organization already set up from a cultural perspective to allow that person to be successful? Do you have a lot of politics that they have to work through? Are you a very title-driven entity? It may not be set up for success for that person to be there. The second is retention. How are you going to keep that person when they get a call 12 months later from your competitor down the street who says, oh, now this person has experience in investment banking and they were at Google previously, that's exactly what I want, right? And then three, I think too, if you decide to allow that person to commute and go back to the Bay Area because you think they'll be more comfortable, what's going to prevent them from leaving 2 years later when they get tired of being on the road all the time and just want to be local? So if there are hesitations in the answers to any of those questions, it's probably worth thinking twice before committing to, I must hire someone from one of the FANG companies.
Got it. So over the last year or so, what are some of the newer executive leadership roles you've seen emerge or that you suspect will emerge in the next few years? We have all C-level folks. We've got your VP Commerce. Cool. So Marian, why don't you start with the CISO role?
So CISO stands for Chief Information Security Officer. And I think this is a role that, it's not an emerging role, it already exists, but I think it's become more prevalent in the last couple of years. And I think the reason is companies, especially enterprise companies, they're under immense pressure to make sure that their data is secure, their information remains private, that their information assets and technologies are adequately protected. And so there's been this rise of CISOs coming into the C-suite role. I think it's an extraordinarily difficult job. They have to make sure that they're establishing and constantly implementing best-in-class IT systems. There's a lot of regulatory and compliance issues that obviously they need to comply with. And it's one role that I don't think there's a lot of talent for because in one sense, a CISO has to be very technically alert and astute. And then equally on the other side, because they have to be visionary and understand a business, they also have to be very strong with business and operations acumen. And I think it's an extraordinarily important role. I'm not quite sure if there's enough supply for the demand.
Now, Ryan, does your Chief AI Officer overlap at all with the CISO?
It can slightly, but often not, right? So I would say the Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer is, yes, a newer role. I saw really two interesting articles in the last 9 months. One said why every organization must hire a Chief AI Officer, and the other article was please do not hire a Chief AI Officer. So it's less about the role as it's titled because there are less than 15 people right now who have that title in large enterprises. And it's more about the thematic of companies now recognizing that artificial intelligence is leaving the research lab and coming into the boardroom. It is a topic of frequent conversation, even if that just means someone on the board read an article about it, how one of their competitors are investing in it, and have now said to their CHRO, please go hire some AI person so we can solve this problem. So what I found is that companies across all industries, whether it's retail, financial services, healthcare, all are exploring what investments should we be making in machine learning strategy and what areas of our business does that affect? Is it operations? Is it supply chain? Could it be security? Maybe it's with personalization and targeted marketing through customer analytics. But the point being, everyone has that as part of their corporate agenda, and it's gone from just being a technology decision to an enterprise level discussion.
Every good role starts with, hey, can we go get somebody who does this? It's everything. We saw it with big data, all the buzzwords, AI, and Cassie, e-commerce.
Well, I'm noticing kind of a theme too, right? It's not that what we've been doing, maybe AI is an exception, but our companies have been doing e-commerce, they've been doing information security, but there's kind of a theme of that need is becoming so specialized that you bring it in-house. A broker, an agency can't suffice any longer. And I think that's the case in my role too. So it's not that our companies have not been doing e-commerce. They've been selling on Amazon and Sephora.com and Chewy.com and on their own websites for years, as long as consumers have been shopping there. But what we're seeing in very quick succession is companies bringing that knowledge in-house, hiring someone, elevating that role to the leadership team. My only comment here about head versus VP is I just have a little chip on my shoulder about title inflation. So it doesn't say chief, but I guess you could. And so I think that's great. One of the reasons I love this role in particular is I think consumer shopping online is a relatively new phenomenon. And so it's allowing people really junior in their career to become specialists and elevate their careers more quickly. So it's a fun trend to watch.
Awesome. All right, Bethany.
So I looked at it two different ways. One, what every client that I deal with needs strong people that can sell the product. So it's one thing to build some technology or build something, a platform that consumers want to use, but it's another thing to acquire customers. And with that, and thinking about the future, I think that more and more companies are going to need to start hiring chief ethics officer. There's so many ramifications, not just from privacy, but as a parent, and I'm married to an educator, so I think a middle school educator, when you have kids using iPads in the classroom and it's tracked to their student number from the time they're in kindergarten, what happens to that information? Or when you have a whole generation of kids that are growing up with their entire lives online, there are social ramifications that we need to think about as a society. And I think that's what we're going to find.
That's a great point. So you all interview executives for a living. So, what's one question you always ask, candidates during an interview, and why? I know we all have our standard interview set. I'd love to hear about the one question. Cassie, performance.
Yeah, so I won't take credit for this. If anyone's familiar with GH Smart, the book Who, this is a strategy right out of their book that I've been using for a long time and really believe in. So the question would be, how will your former boss or plug-in ex manager that they've had in the past, how will your former boss rate your performance on a scale of 1 to 10? And it can be performance broadly, it can be a specific aspect of what they've done. The technique here is called TORC, so thread of reference check. By framing the question and putting them in the mindset, believing that you will ask that person, and you should ask that person, but putting them in that frame of reference encourages them to be more authentic, more transparent, more honest with what they say. But it's important to, one, hold them accountable to actually give you a score, and then ask them what would that manager say. So that would, what would you have had to have done to get to a 10? And that's essentially ask them, what were their weaknesses in a more constructive way. And then actually use this information when you do their references. So ask the reference the exact same question, ask for a score, ask for what they could be doing differently to get to a 10. And you'll often find references are a little bit closeted with wanting to say anything negative about the people they're referencing. And so follow up and say, well, Joe actually said that this was an area of weakness, and it gives that reference permission to speak more freely. So I just think that's a really powerful question.
Also seems like a self-awareness measure.
Yes.
All right, Ryan, misconception.
Yeah, so I'll ask people, what do you think is the biggest professional misconception about you? And most people will pause because they've never been asked that question. And it reveals a level of self-awareness. So if someone says, well, people think that I'm quiet and reserved, but I'm really not. Or I've been told I'm a little rough around the edges and I have a big ego. It's likely that those misconceptions are actually reality. So this can actually serve as a good way to then coach the organization who's hiring that person on maybe a couple of areas for potential improvement as they're onboarding.
Marian?
So my question didn't really fit on the board, but effectively it's what happens in 6 months' time. So I have very candid conversations with our final candidates that are going for executive roles. I think they really appreciate it. And again, I can't take credit for this particular question because I read it in a Forbes article a couple of years ago and I really like it. But it basically says to the candidate that's the finalist, assuming you're the successful candidate and you're placed in the company, and we fast forward 6 months, and either I or maybe both of us come to the decision that this isn't working out, and I call you in 6 months' time, what do you think the main reason for this will be? And the reason why I ask it, I like the rationale behind it, because either, depending on how the candidate answers, they'll either explain or give more insight into one of their weaknesses that they feel like they haven't, or they just haven't volunteered, which I think is important. Or secondly, perhaps this is a question that they can express some concerns or hesitations that they have around the role that they're about to take. Maybe it's the role itself, maybe it's the scope of role, maybe it's who they're reporting into, or maybe it's a concern around the company that they're potentially going to join. And I think whether it's a weakness that they identify or a concern around the company or the role, both are really important to identify early on.
Cool. I like that.
And I like to ask what the hardest thing you've ever done, and I give people the option they can answer personally or professionally. And I find it fascinating to hear what they choose, and I think it's 50-50. But it gives you a sense of, their perseverance, how they solve problems, their humility, their willingness to be vulnerable. So I find it to be pretty telling asking that question.
So we have time for one more question that I think we'll go through. And this one's going to be, what is the most important training program you encourage founders and companies to implement, and why? We've talked a lot about the, recruiting process, but, training programs are a whole separate piece. Ryan with another answer. Let's start with you. Meta?
So when we talk to founders or companies, we kind of use this acronym of META as you're interviewing people to look for evidence-based examples of how someone mobilizes, executes, transforms, and does so with agility. So from our research, top performers are 4 times more likely to affect to be a bigger impact on their company than their peers. They're 30% more likely to contribute to the bottom line in a meaningful way. So as we coach hiring managers, we walk through this process of looking at individuals and finding that evidence of mobilizing, executing, transforming, and doing so with agility.
Marian.
So I wrote down leadership training. So we encourage all of our founders and C-suite executives at our portfolio companies to take leadership training. And the reason for it is because I think the simple fact is people aren't born leaders. So either you learn under someone who is a very good leader, or alternatively, which is probably more likely, you receive leadership training. And there are a lot of characteristics that make up a strong leader, but 3 to 4, maybe I'll talk about 3, that we think are very crucial for leaders to recognize and to understand. First is integrity. And so this is especially true at an early stage company where you're building out a product and a lot of people are taking a lot of risk to join your company. You have to be trusted as a leader. And so employees are really looking at the leaders of the company, being the executives, and making sure that their actions match their words. Second, it's really important that leaders are good decision makers. We always want more time and we always want more data before we make decisions, but that's just not reality. And the reality is that a company is as successful as the sum of all its decisions. So leaders, executives who are good leaders, need to make decisions, in a timely fashion based off the data that they have at that time. And I think it's got to be defensible. So it's okay if the decision isn't right, but providing they could defend the decision that they made at that time. And then the third is vision. So leaders have a very important role in setting a vision for the company and making sure that they can motivate all their employees at all levels to work towards that common goal. And so these are 3 of the characteristics that we really help our executives learn and understand in order to become better leaders.
Now, Bethany, yours also falls under leadership.
So I think I agree with everything Marian said, and I would just say, if the question is what can a company do, I encourage our clients to offer some sort of coaching, especially at the executive level. But as an individual, I think you have to own it yourself. If your company's not going to pay for you to be coached, everybody can benefit from having someone give them direct feedback on things they can improve. And it makes a huge difference in the culture and the teams. So coaching.
Absolutely. Cassie.
So I'm sure you guys have all heard the statistics. I mean, companies on average are maybe get hires right maybe 50% of the time, and the cost of a bad hire is something like 15x, right? Regardless of how accurate those numbers are, it's significant. And I think what's a shame is most folks in their careers are expected to interview and select people to join a company and are never taught how to do it. And so as a result, you kind of get a couple buckets of interviewers. You get, the harsh person that's going to drill down and make this really hard and ask trick questions, and whoever survives that process gets the job. Or you get the warm and fuzzy that is going to spend as much time with you as possible and really get to know you deep down and take you out golfing or take your spouse out to dinner or whatever it might be. Or you might get that like art critic, the person that like uses their gut instinct. And none of those methods are very effective. And so I think the best thing I can give to our portfolio of companies is teach them how to be data-driven, teach them how to structure interview processes that prioritize how and what questions. How did you do it? What was the outcome? What was your approach? What would you have done differently? Those types of data-driven questions that focus on historical. And if you do go into the hypothetical, you focus on, in this company, this is the job that needs to be done. Let's talk through how you would accomplish it with these specific criteria. So for me, that's probably the best thing I can do to help them, because if you have the right people in the job, that solves most all else.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining me up here today.
Thank you.
Guys, have a wonderful rest of the conference. And if you have any questions, feel free to come find us at any point in time.